Yeah, just by way of quick introduction, I grew up as a part of the system. I'm ex-military. I spent 6.5 years with the RCMP as an intelligence contractor doing intelligence work for the RCMP on terrorism investigations as well as investigations into judges and politicians, which is a whole other world. Um, I also work for the Privy Council office, which is the cabinet office of the government, and the intelligence section there works directly for the prime minister and the cabinet. And then I worked for things like the War Crimes Tribunal, but all of those jobs were apolitical. We were both advised and trained to stay out of politics. And that has stuck with me. I'm nonpartisan. I'm not a conservative. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a dipper. I'm not a shill for Max Bernier, which is popping up lately. Um, and I maintain sort of a militant, nonpartisan position, if I can put it that way. But a couple of years ago, I did start becoming political in the sense of like, my whole life I've been trained to stay in the background and work for the crown, not to be in front criticizing the crown. And but what I've seen with my trips overseas to exciting places like Bosnia and Albania and Belarus and every other crapple on the planet, is those things that we took for granted in Canada for so long, like freedom of speech, are now starting to disappear. They're being challenged. And ironically, the greatest pressure I feel is not from some wacko luffing something guy over here or some nut bar over there. It's coming from the government of Canada. And that I find truly disturbing. So free speech, I think, if you think about it, is your single most important right. And a lot of people say, no, no, the right to be alive is the most important right. The right not to be arbitrarily murdered is your most important right. And you kind of go, yeah, individually it is, but collectively as a society, we can lose a few people here and there, but we can't lose freedom of speech. Because we lose freedom of speech, everything else goes with it. And I've been to enough places where countries have fallen apart, and this is like Albania, Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia, those sorts of places where I see the same things happening here. As soon as they start coming for freedom of speech, you can pretty much guarantee everything else goes next. So I wasn't going to start with it today, but we were discussing this. The Member of Parliament, Mr. Michael Cooper, seems to have caused a bit of an upset. And his boss, Mr. Scheer, is quite upset with him. He's been chucked off the Justice Committee in Parliament. His name's been dragged through the press as both a good guy and a bad guy. And so the question is, well, what's actually happening? What did he do that was so wrong that he's got all of the major parliamentary parties angry at him, including his own party? So here we are in Parliament. They're having a parliamentary committee hearing, and they're talking about extremism and violence and terrorism and all this good stuff, which they should be doing. It's standard business. And they invited a Muslim gentleman in to come in and talk, and he was saying he thought, the Muslim fellow thought, that conservative commentators were causing violence. And the more conservative commentators you get speaking, you get more violence. And he goes, look at Christchurch, the shoot up of the mosque there by that right-wing extremist. And where Mr. Cooper went wrong was he kind of put up his hand and said, well, just a second. The fellow that was shot up the mosque in Christchurch and like slaughtered all those innocent people was not a right-wing fellow. And in fact, if you actually read the manifesto, you would see that he said the conservative movement should be buried. And he actually used the word buried. You think that's where conservatives go? They should just be buried because they're useless. And he says they don't conserve anything, so why are they there? And he then later in the document does a rhetorical question and answer with himself. Why did I shoot up the mosque? Why did I do this? Why did I do that? And one of the things he asked himself is, well, which country do I think is doing a good job right now? And he said, Red China. And he actually calls it Red China, which people don't call it that anymore. It's Communist China or the People's Republic of China. But he calls it Red China. And here you have a problem with the narrative. And this is where Mr. Cooper went wrong. Is the narrative is that it is the right-wing crazies that are causing the problems. But in this case, it was the left-wing crazy that was causing the problem. And that causes discord in the narrative. Everybody gets upset. So Mr. Cooper has been removed from the committee. And I look at that and go, well, that's bad. But something actually terrifying has happened beyond that. And that is Parliament now twice has moved to have his entire section of testimony removed from Hansard so you won't have to read this disturbing information. So you have a member of Parliament, duly and legally elected, speaking on the public record, and he is not saying anything that can't be disproved, like he's not lying. And what he's saying may be upsetting to some folks, but it's accurate. But because he is accurately presenting information people don't like, they're cutting the record out and destroying it. And what they did to him is bad, but what they're doing to Hansard to me is terrifying. In other words, free speech by a member of Parliament speaking in a parliamentary forum where he's granted like far more protection than you and I have, is now being pushed down the memory hole, literally. This is 1984 actually happening. And for folks who didn't read 1984, the hero of the story is Winston Smith, and he works for the Ministry of Truth, and his job is to take newspaper articles the government doesn't like and pull them out of the record and destroy them so there's no bad record there. So what we have is our parliament actually committing an act of 1984, literally removing stuff from the public record because somebody found it offensive. And it's not even untrue, it's just somebody doesn't like the narrative. So that's kind of where we're at in the country, where a member of parliament speaking in parliament doesn't have freedom of speech, and his own party boss didn't back him, which is even kind of a bit strange. But anyway, enough of that. So where I usually start with a lot of these things, I get these emails and people call in or whatever and say, what the hell is going on? And that's kind of where a lot of the questions start is, so you see the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester get blown up and a bunch of 14-year-old girls get shredded by a bomb. And then you see the London Bridge attack where a bunch of folks get run over by a car, and the Charlie Hebdo attacks and the Bataclan attacks and the vehicle attack in Nice, and the attack in the Netherlands, and the attack in Toronto, and the attack in Edmonton, and the attack in San Bernardino, and the attack in the nightclub in Florida, and just on and on and on and on and on it goes. And people go, what the heck is going on? What are these people on about? And, you sort of get this, well, all Muslims are crazy. And it's like, well, they're not. But nonetheless, it's a fair question. What the heck is going on? So to slightly oversimplify it, here's what's going on. You've got Islam, the religion of Islam. And about 1.5 billion people will self-identify and say, yes, I'm a Muslim, for whatever that means. So to overgeneralize again, you've got kind of two groups right now, and you've got this one group that kind of from here over to here, they want to take Islam as a faith, as a religion, and they want to humanize it, modernize it, weld some technology onto it, and drive it into the future so it can be some sort of religious faith of the present and of the future. And then you get the other crowd over here, from here over to here, and these are the folks who want to take Islam as a political force. They're the Islamists. Somebody who believes in political Islam. So this is the Muslim Brotherhood, it's ISIS, it's Al-Qaeda, it's Al-Nusra, it's the Boko Haram, it's the Abu Sayyaf group, it's the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, it's all those folks. And they genuinely believe that Islam is not a faith. They believe that Islam is a political system which includes faith. But it's also it should be your social system, your economic system, your education system, your child-rearing system, everything should be under Islam. And even that might be kind of acceptable, except they're supremacist, which means they believe they have the right to impose that on you. So when you go around the world and you see all these bombings occurring, so they're occurring in France and Sweden and Belgium and Canada and America, whatever, what you're seeing is these guys here, the folks from kind of the center over to there, believe they are supremacists. They believe they have the right to impose their will on anybody. And some of them believe they have the right to violently impose it on others. So this is why you're getting the bombings. But the interesting part is these guys over here, what we'll loosely call the bad guys, genuinely believe they have opposition from their own faith. In other words, they're most afraid of other Muslims. So the people they attack the most viciously and killing them and, outing them and burning down their businesses and all that kind of thing, it is these Muslims over here are busy bombing these Muslims over here. So when you look around the world and say, who's dying from all of this? People in the West say, oh, the Muslims are killing us, whatever. It's like, yeah, it's bad over here. But the top 10 countries in the world that have a terrorism death problem are all Muslim majority countries. So as bad as it is for the folks in Brussels when the airport blows up, or in Manchester when their daughters get shredded at a conference, or concert rather, it's worse in some of those countries. So that's kind of worth noting, that there is this global struggle for the soul of Islam, which is the problem. So you've got these folks that want to move back to the past with a political system they literally want to impose on everybody. And then over here you've got the other Muslims who are kind of the silent majority, are there guys like Salim Mansour, who actually says we need a modernist, reformist Muslim that will stand up and challenge the extremists. And what happened to poor old Salim Mansour this week is he got pitched out of the Conservative Party, and you kind of go, come on, it's the one guy you've got who is educated. Like, the guy's a PhD in Islamic studies. He's a professor. The university recognizes him with awards up to yin yang. He's a super nice guy. I've worked with him. And he wants to be that voice, this voice here. But instead he's being silenced because these guys over here have that much influence right now. So Anyway, so when we talk about these guys over here, the bad guys, the Islamists, who are they? Well, they're a bunch of different folks, but the largest single formed effective group is something called the Muslim Brotherhood. And you'll hear this a lot. They were formed in Egypt in 1928 by a guy by the name of Hassan al-Banna, and he decided for a variety of reasons that the solution to all the world's problems was Islam. So the motto of the Muslim Brotherhood is actually Islam is the solution. So no matter what your problem is, global warming, Islam is a solution. It's flooding, Islam is a solution. The schools aren't working, Islam is a solution. I don't like my sister going out with that guy, Islam is a solution. So it is a totalitarian supremacist system which is taking Islam and moving it into a political force. So the Muslim Brotherhood operates around the world. They're incredibly strong in places like Egypt, Turkey, Jordan, Tunisia, whatever. But outside of the Middle East, they operate in about 81 different countries that I can show where they have a consistent, structured, organized presence with mosques, charities, schools, cultural groups, and all that sort of stuff. And of course, that includes Canada. So the Muslim Brotherhood is a political Islamist group, kind of from here to over here, and they're working very hard at infiltrating Canada, America, Sweden, Norway, Finland, France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, Italy, wherever. They're having very poor luck in Poland and Hungary, where the government has just said no. And the Japanese government years ago put immigration from Islamic countries to zero and just said, no, we're not dealing with it, go away. But here in the West, broadly speaking, the G10, G20 countries, whatever, we have a very serious entryism problem. These folks are infiltrating into our system. So how does entryism express itself? And what is entryism to start with? Well, entryism is the process of someone joining a political party. Not because they like the party, not because they like the platform, not because they like the leader, but because they want to get into that party. Then they'll bring all their buddies in, do the volunteer work, pour in the money, and then take the party and turn it in the direction they want to go. So for the last several years, I've been haranguing on about the Liberal Party, and so have most of these Muslims over here. They've been warning about the Liberal Party having Muslim Brotherhood folks in it and Jamaah Islamiyah folks in it, who are in the Liberal Party not to modernize Islam, not to integrate into Canada, but to actually take the party and drive it in their own direction. So Omar El-Gabra and Nikra Khalid are the two you always pick on because they're the most obvious. But there's several others. They're in the Senate, and they're in a whole bunch of other places as well. The folks who draw the most attention to this are other Muslims. So guys like Tahir Gora have like detailed to a great level of degree who these people are, what they're on about, what they believe in. Now, it's fun to hammer on the liberals because they have such a problem with this and it's so obvious. But having said that, I would have thought, if you'd asked me 5 or 6 years ago, the Conservative Party and well, even Bernier's party was kind of a separate story because it's so new, but I would have thought the Conservative Party would have a natural resistance to this. They've been inoculated against it, that this kind of cancer wouldn't be allowed to metastasize inside the Conservative Party. And much to my surprise, I was wrong, that in fact a number of hardcore Islamists have moved into the Ontario Conservative Party, they've moved into the Federal Party, and now they're starting to express their will. So just one quick example of that would be a guy by the name of Khalid Rashid in Mississauga, who is an Ontario progressive conservative who sits in the legislature there at the provincial level. So he got up in the Ontario Provincial Parliament about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and he was speaking during members' they call it members' time or whatever. Individual members of the parliament are allowed to stand up and just say whatever they want, and usually they babble away about, oh, my constituency had a cancer fundraiser, we opened the new hospital. It's all the kind of good news stuff. They like to get on the record about their own constituency. So Khalid Rashid gets up there and says, oh, I went to the El-Kazaz Foundation last night, and the El-Kazaz Foundation is so wonderful. They're helping immigrants, they're educating people. And I'm sitting there going, El-Kazaz? This isn't Khalid El-Kazaz, is it? And sure enough, as it is. Khalid El-Kazaz was a leading member of the Muslim Brotherhood's government in Egypt when the Brotherhood was running the Egyptian parliament, and they were the most oppressive government Egypt ever had, and the people chucked them out in one of the biggest revolutions ever. But here he is now operating out of Toronto, and we have a conservative member of the Legislative Assembly in Ontario standing up and extolling the virtues of this guy. So we put out a podcast on this. We sent it to the provincial office of the premier and a few others and said, why is this happening? And it's like, well, it's all good. Don't worry about it. This is literally where it's at. There is absolutely no will or sort of ability or whatever to resist against this kind of thing. So that's not great. And again, as much as I like to hammer away on Trudeau, and I do, and I believe that I should, it's not just him. All the other parties have the same problem, including the Dippers. The only thing I think with the Dippers is the Islamist extremists have realized that it's a poor investment. The NDP is never going to form a national government, so putting effort into it is maybe not the work. So anyway, so what are some of the practical effects of this? People say, well, why are you so worried about it? And I say, well, here's one just for fun. Your federal government, well, first off, I'm going to tell you politicians are lying to you, but you probably won't be surprised by that. But typically politicians lie about their girlfriend, the goat that was in the bed with them that was never there, and all that kind of stuff. And you think, okay, politicians lie about collecting taxes, whatever, that's fine. But right now, your federal government has a ongoing policy of lying to Canadians about national security events. So as somebody who testifies in court as a court expert, I'm sort of familiar with the idea of evidence, i.e. if you're going to say something like the government is lying to people on a consistent basis, you might want to show evidence. So here's a little thing. You might remember about 3 or 4 weeks ago in Toronto, Richmond Hill, 2 fellows were arrested. Cops show up, bust the house, grab a bunch of explosive material, disappear, and they arrest the 2 guys and drag them off. Literally less than an hour later, the Minister of Public Safety, the Honourable Ralph Goodale from Saskatchewan here, stands up and says, it is not a national security event, it's a local police matter. And I just kind of like, wow, let's back up here. So the 2 guys are Iranian, both born in Iran, father and son team. The reason they were under the attention of the police was they tried to get into the United States, and U.S. Customs and Border said, you boys ain't coming in here, go back home. Now, just a quick background here, America and Iran are almost at war with each other right now. Yeah. So America and Iran are almost at a war with each other right now, and if you notice, there was a couple of tankers hit the other day. They're actually shooting at each other in the Gulf, so they're that close to having a war, and we've got a couple of Canadians with a whole bunch of explosives who are Iranians trying to get into America. They get stopped by U.S. Customs and Border and sent back. So that defines a national security event. When foreigners are trying to bomb something in America at a country they're at war with, it's an issue, and the Americans take this stuff seriously, by the way. So CBSA is involved, Canada Border Services Agency. The FBI is investigating their contacts in America, and the RCMP and CSIRS are investigating their contacts here in Canada, and it was York Region that actually arrested them. So Mr. Goodale says it's not a national security event, when in fact it defines a national security event. This is serious stuff when a country is almost at war. And then it's a local police matter, and it's like, well, the FBI, the RCMP, CSIS, CBSA, and Customs and Border are all federal police agencies, and they're all involved. So it's a deliberate and willful lie planned out ahead of time. Now you might say, well, okay, you got caught lying once, it's a politician, whatever. So let's back up. Last summer, August 18th in the evening, fellow in his car tries to get up onto Parliament Hill, and you've got to go through a checkpoint that's run by the RCMP in order to get your car up on the hill. And the only cars that can get up there are cars that belong to members of parliament, senators, or if you've got business up there. So if you're the photocopy or repair guy or the Coca-Cola machine guy, you can get up onto the hill. So a bunch of cars lined up, they're waiting their turn to go through the checkpoint. Buddy pulls out with his car, runs a couple of people down, chases a woman in a baby carriage, and eventually crashes his car, takes off, he gets grabbed, he's arrested. Nobody heard about this. Very few people heard about it. And when a couple of members of the press tried to ask, well, who was he and what was he doing? They said there was no threat to public safety and it's not a security event. And it's like, I would think the people who got run over would probably disagree with that. The one with the baby carriage who had to hike to get her baby saved would probably disagree with that. And then a member of parliament said in public, he said, I went to the RCMP and said, what the heck was that? Is somebody trying to kill us? And they said it wasn't any of his business to ask those kinds of questions. And it's like, holy crap, he's a member of parliament, and that's his house. That's where he lives. That's his thing. But yet members of parliament are not allowed to ask these questions. So that's kind of weird. Then you had the Danforth shooting, where that young fellow goes down the Danforth, murders 2 girls, injures 12 or 14 other people. And there's a whole series of rumors out there about he was trained in Pakistan and this and that, whatever. And much of that is actually true. But You're not allowed to ask questions about that. They removed the memorial after a couple of weeks, and the police report still is not out 6 months after it's been finished. The autopsy results haven't been released, even though the autopsy is finished. And again, you're not allowed to know this kind of stuff. Then there was the Pearson Airport. Some young fella took a fuel truck and hit an airplane 3 times. And the actual story is there's nothing going on, nothing to see, move along. It was an accident. And it's kind of like, he hit the aircraft hard enough to cave in the nose and put 5 people in hospital. This wasn't a vehicle accident, and then he did it 2 more times. But we're not allowed to know about it. The fact that he was a Sri Lankan Muslim and we just had the attack in Sri Lanka, maybe there's some sensitivity, but we're literally not allowed to ask questions about a guy taking a truck and ramming a passenger airplane at our national, or our largest national airport. And anyway, I could go on. There's a whole bunch more. The Mississauga bombing, the attack in Barrie, and a bunch of others. But every time you go to ask these questions, you're not allowed to know. You don't need to know. Just move along. Nothing to see here. So it is a deliberate policy of hiding the problem. And when you kind of look at these things and say, what connects all these events together, there's one thing. They were all Amish. No, they weren't. Hang on just a second. You know, this is the issue. If those were Amish guys doing it, or if they were whatever, I mean, it would be all over the place. But the Amish, as a typical rule, aren't in this kind of thing. So what we're seeing now is not only the government won't report information on national security events where Canadians are being killed or threatened to be killed or wounded, or people from Canada are going down to try and blow up Americans, which is probably our greatest single security nightmare, is some person from Canada goes to the US and carries out a major terrorist attack. They'll close the border on us and there goes our economy, and you know that here better than anybody else. So that's one thing. Let's not tell anybody anything so they can't talk about it. And then there's the flip side of this, which is let's silence Canadian voices so they can't talk. So what do I mean by that? So the Honorable Chrystia Freeland, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, goes to the United Nations and it's some big grand conference about terrorism. So she stands up and says, let me just think about this for a second. She says, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, incels, nativists, and radical anti-globalists who want to commit acts of violence are the greatest threat to the stability of Canada and the West. And you kind of go, wow, I can't think the last time a white supremacist or a Nazi carried out an attack in Canada. Actually, I can. It was like about 15 years ago, and it was 2 idiots in Calgary. One Nazi blew up another Nazi by putting a bomb in his backyard. And it's kind of like, okay, Nazis blowing up Nazis. I know we're not supposed to laugh at that, but it is kind of funny. But that's the last time any one of them did anything. So here's the thing. I do this for a living, and I kind of thought, where is this coming from? Like, where are they getting this idea that white supremacy and neo-Nazis are somehow a threat, not to just making bad things happen, but an actual threat to the stability of the country? So I thought, well, what does the government of Canada itself actually say about this? So if you get bored sometime, go into the Public Safety Canada website. And if you go sifting through the thing, or if you do a word search for listed terrorism entities, you'll find that the government of Canada, and this is essentially CSIS and the RCMP, have a list of terrorist groups in Canada. And these are groups that pose a threat to Canada, pose a threat to Canadians, or pose a threat to Canadian interests. It doesn't cover other terrorist groups. So if some guy in Rwanda wants to blow up some guy in South America or whatever, not our problem, we don't care, they're not listed. Only groups that threaten Canada, Canadians, or Canadian interests get listed by public safety. So there's 55 of them, and if you download everything, you'll see it's a 10,500 word report on 55 different terrorist groups and what they're on about, and who they're trying to kill and why they're trying to kill them and everything else. So guess how many of the groups are white supremacist? 0, not a 1. Guess how many are neo-Nazi in orientation? 0, not a 1. So I thought, just for fun, how are those Christians doing? Are they in there? They got a team on the they got a team in there? Are they going? And the answer is the word Christian is in there twice, both times as targeted victims. In other words, they're groups trying to kill Christians, and that's why they get listed. So anyway, there's 55 groups. Here's a fun question: how many of them are Islamist in orientation? 40. 40 of 55, or 70% of all listed terrorist groups, are Islamist. These guys over here, this is them. So the RCMP and CSIS collectively over the last several years have identified terrorist groups they think are a problem. 40 out of the 55, or 70%, are actually Islamist. Not a single white group, not a single neo-Nazi group, not a single incel group, not a single anti-globalist, whatever. So how do we silence free speech in Canada? Well, we take that and say neo-Nazis are the greatest threat, or white supremacists are the greatest threat. And when you put up your hand and say, geez, I'm not sure that's right, Oh, you're a Nazi sympathizer. Oh, you're a white supremacist. Oh, Mr. Cooper, yes, you're obviously a white supremacist neo-Nazi supporter. So we're going to silence you. So it's this business of inverting reality. The reality is 40 out of the 55 groups are Islamist in orientation. So let's invert that. Claim that the white supremacists are the worst problem, and when you question them, you become the neo-Nazi. So young Mr. Trudeau decides to go to Quebec. He's doing one of his little town hall things, which I really think he should quit doing, but anyway. So he goes to this town hall. A woman sticks her hand up in Quebec and says, look, what is the actual number for immigration? It was 150, now it's 250, now it's 350, 350,000 a year. Where are you going with all this, and what is this going to cost? And his actual answer was, there's no place for your racism here. So by asking a question about immigration numbers, which every government since the country has been formed has struggled with this issue. What is the right number? How many do we bring in? Where do we get them from? Every government struggles with this, and none of them ever seem to get it right, but there it is. It's an issue. But if you raise the issue, it's because you're racist. So when she tried to push, he just said, well, it's your intolerance that makes you a racist. And so simply asking a technical question that every government has to deal with makes you a racist. So we also had, and you remember Mr. Trudeau was out this end of the country, and a woman stood up and she was giving a positive, friendly question to him, and she used the word mankind. So Trudeau jumps in, cuts her off, and corrects her and says, no, we use the word people kind. And of course, nobody actually uses the word people kind. It's a silly made up word. But anyway, and a bunch of people made fun of the Prime Minister for using stupid words in public. So his chief assistant, Mr. Gerard Butts, who is literally the power behind the throne, he is the hand in the puppet, he's the man behind the curtain, he's Trudeau's brain. He's Cardinal Richelieu to the king, or whatever you want to describe him as. He actually got out the next day and said, this is about alt-right neo-Nazi friends of the rebel media. And it's like, for simply questioning the Prime Minister about using stupid words in public, you're alt-right and you're neo-Nazi. So anything that you do to question the government now makes you a Nazi. And it's like, I actually know a bit about Nazi stuff. I've been to Germany, I've been in a concentration camp, I've seen all this kind of stuff, and like, whatever folks are on about here, it ain't Nazism. But merely speaking about it, it makes you a neo-Nazi, and this is how we shut you down. So it's the same thing everywhere you go now. As soon as you say anything that runs contrary to the narrative, you're alt-right, you're a neo-Nazi, you're a white supremacist, you're that. So because they can't deal with the actual issues, instead will label you and shut you down that way. So this is the actual attack on free speech, and this is the problem. And again, bizarrely enough, when you track it down, most of this stuff is coming from these guys over here. This is the group that a lot of it's originating from. So that is getting to be a real issue. They have gotten to the point where the Islamists now can actually control much of the debate in Canada by labeling people Islamophobic. So the whole M103 anti-Islamophobia motion and all that good stuff was put forward by Iqra Khalid. She used to be a part of the Muslim Student Association. In her own writings, she says she is pro-Sharia and pro-Salafist. In other words, she supports these guys over here. And this is what she is on about. And she says merely questioning Islam is Islamophobic. Therefore, you're locked in with the Nazis and the right-wing extremists and everything else. So you can criticize Jews, you can criticize Christians, you can criticize Hindus, you can criticize atheists, you can complain about the Mormons on your doorstep or whatever. But as soon as you say anything about even the extremist Islam, it's because you're a racist. So this is where we're going with free speech in Canada, and it's a problem. We can't even talk about the problem anymore because you're going to get lumped in and silenced. So won't go into the whole media buyout thing because you can see where that's going. Won't go into the whole digital charter because now we're being told the internet has to become a safe space. And if your feelings are hurt on the internet, you can go to the government and say, that person hurt my feelings on the internet. And the government will go to the ISP provider and actually shut that person down. So now just saying something mean to somebody or even something they interpret as mean on the internet, if this digital charter thing goes through, that will silence that. So the whole social media thing, whatever. And whether it's true or not, one of the members of the cabinet of the Liberal government is actually saying, well, maybe we need to shut down social media in the run-up to the election. to protect the election, because we can't have people talking about these things during an election period, which to my way of thinking is maybe social media should only run in the run up to the election because that's the only important time. But whatever. So anyway, there we go. So all this kind of stuff is going on now. A lot of this stuff so far has been kind of doom and gloom. I've been saying a lot of, really bad stuff. And so let's actually take a look around and say, is there something positive happening? Is there any good news out there between the bombings and the racial attacks and the idiocy of, throwing Celine Mansour under the bus and throwing Cooper under the bus? And yeah, I'm actually a lot more optimistic than I was even 6 months ago, and just a whole bunch more optimistic than I was a year ago. So why would I be optimistic in a time when things are not so good? One is, bizarrely enough, the country of Germany. Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, is the absolute darling of the progressive left. The Antifa crowd and the progressive love her because she represents everything they're on about. She stood up and actually admitted that Germany has a no-go zone problem. In other words, there are geographic zones in Germany where the police don't go most of the time, and most of the citizens don't go because of fear of violence from either the Islamists are there or the Middle Eastern gangs who are controlling their neighborhood. So to have the Chancellor of Germany stand up and admit in public that the German government has lost control of parts of the country to Islamist groups was a hell of a statement. And she said it out loud and then came back and repeated it just to make the point clear. And that absolutely gobsmacked the progressive left, because they challenge anyone. If you say there's a no-go zone in France or Germany or England or whatever, that's because you're racist, you're Islamophobic. That's the only reason you would say that. And now bloody Angela Merkel's saying it out loud. So hallelujah, Angela Merkel, for saying that out loud. Also in Germany, there's something called the Office for the Protection of the Constitution, which is kind of like their national level intelligence agency that does internal security. And they just shocked the entire intelligence community around the world, but particularly in Europe, by putting out a 40-page paper that says the rising wave of anti-Semitism in Germany is driven by political Islam. So the official story in Germany, it's all those right-wing neo-Nazis that are causing anti-Jewish problems or anti-Semitism problems. But the actual federal level intelligence agency came out and said, no, the problem here is political Islam. And the weird thing is they said it out loud and stuck it on the internet. In other words, the average citizen can read it. And this is the first ever European intelligence service has come out and said what we all know is the rising wave of anti-Semitism, anti-Christianity, anti-Hinduism, and all this stuff is being driven by political Islam. And that's a major, well-funded, important intelligence service working for Angela Merkel. So, a couple of happy things happening in France. Go next door. In France, we have President Macron of France, who a lot of people, including me, looked at and thought, oh wow, the guy marries his own mother, which is a bit weird, but anyway, let's forget that. He's kind of a ex-banker, but he's really a socialist, and he's kind of all over the map, and he doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Then he gets this whole yellow vest movement, which has had him up against the wall, and you're kind of looking at it going like, what is this guy doing? He's not going anywhere. And all of a sudden, as part of this grand dialogue they're having in France about where should France go and what should it look like and what should the labor laws be like and what should the schools be like and what should the universities be like, they're having this huge national discussion. Macron is at a press conference and he says, political Islam is trying to secede from the Republic. So in other words, those 800 or so neighborhoods that the Islamists control in France, he actually has openly admitted to a microphone with the cameras running that there is a problem. These guys are trying to secede from the Republic, which in France, of course, is a huge issue. And then he said something even more bizarre. Not that it's wrong, it's just that he said it. He said, this is a political force masquerading as a religion. So in other words, it's the Muslim Brotherhood doing most of this. It says it's a religion. They claim they want protection because they're a religion, but it's actually a political movement. So the president of France stands up and says to the national press, political Islam is trying to separate from France, and it is a political project masquerading as a religion. And it's like, wow, the French actually admit in public they have a problem. That's great. Hi, my name's France, and I'm an alcoholic. They're actually getting somewhere, and that's where you start, is to say I have a problem. And once you can do that, then you can move. I won't go into a whole bunch more, but there's the AIVD, which is the Dutch level intelligence service, and I don't know what it actually says. It's about that long. AIVD stands for a whole bunch of very long Dutch words, but it is their national level intelligence service. They put out a thing in December of last year saying that the stability of the Dutch state is at risk. And the risk is coming from the education system of the country, which has been thoroughly penetrated by Islamists who are teaching young children to isolate from the state, to not integrate, to not learn to speak Dutch, but to work towards creating a caliphate on Dutch territory. And they say this thing has got to be such a problem now that it is a threat to the Dutch state. And again, what they're saying is nothing new. Everybody knows this. But the fact the Dutch government is saying it out loud in public is absolutely stunning. Same thing in Austria. The chancellor there said people who want political Islam are going to start flying them out of the country, which they're doing. The Poles have just said, yeah, no, we're not going down that road. We won't even start down that road. The Czechs and the Slovaks have done the thing. They said, we're not going down the road. The Hungarians are building a fence. And so we see this kind of wave across Europe where after years and years and years of problems, we finally find a number of very unlikely leaders standing up and saying this. It's like Angela Merkel and Macron are the two folks doing it. The British Parliament just refused an Islamophobia discussion and said, we don't like the definition of Islamophobia put to us by the Islamic groups, and we're refusing it. So what was going to happen in the United Kingdom if you questioned Islam or you even questioned Muslimness? Was the word they actually used, Muslimness. If you criticized anybody for Muslimness, you could be like charged criminally and silenced. And the United Kingdom Parliament, the folks who invented free speech, if you recall, actually said, no, we're canning it, we're not going to go down that route. So it was like, hallelujah, Prime Minister May in her last month of power finally put a flag in the ground and said no. So God love her for that. So to the south, we have our American friends. And President Trump has just stood up about a month ago or so, a couple of months ago, and said he's seriously looking at a way of listing the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group, which other countries have already done. Egypt has done it, Saudi Arabia has done it, the United Arab Emirates has done it. Russia calls them a terrorist group, the United Kingdom calls them an extremist group, and now America is looking at actually doing something, either listing the Brotherhood or listing its front groups. CARE USA, which operates out of Washington, ISNA, which operates out of Indianapolis, and say maybe we'll list the front groups as terrorist groups, and therefore giving them money or talking to them constitutes an act of terrorism itself. So, hallelujah for that. Now, here in Canada, when we look at our political leadership, we see what? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not only that, we see a number of political leaders in Canada who are not only trying to resist or trying to push back a bit. In fact, they are virtue signaling their submission. So again, I sort of thought the Tory party would be a bit more resistant. I thought some of the Liberals would maybe eventually kind of stand up and say there's something wrong here. And I know in the backbench MPs there's a lot of support. So just since I've been here, we've had two different members of Parliament call us, say they want to meet me when I get back to Washington, or back to Ottawa, to talk about this stuff. But they don't want it on the public record because they're afraid of it. But good news is, I mean, there are a bunch of members of Parliament out there and a whole bunch of other people who are looking at this and saying, you know, where are we going? We need to do something. So that's kind of good news. I think there is an awareness. And one of the reasons we wanted to come to Alberta was just talk to a whole bunch of different people in Grand Prairie and Lloydminster, and we were over to Saskatoon as well, and Saskatchewan and all this sort of stuff, just to get kind of a ground feel for what's going on. And it's been quite enlightening. Alberta's conservative territory, small c conservative, that's not exactly a secret. So I was expecting to see much more hardcore support for Andrew Scheer, or maybe for Maxime Bernier because he's a libertarian, which is kind of a conservative thing. But what I'm finding, just personally, is there's a lot of soft support for the Conservatives, i.e. we don't want Trudeau re-elected because we think it'll wreck the country, but we're not quite sure we can vote for Scheer, and we're not too thrilled with Bernier either. So what I've seen last year when I was down in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, down the Gaspé Peninsula, down into Quebec, that part, was increasingly I see people sort of looking at the menu on the wall, and there's Party A, Party B, Party C, or Party D, and they're going, I don't like what I'm reading on the menu here. And then they look at the individual leaders, Leader A, Leader B, Leader C, Leader D, and they're coming back and saying, I don't like what I hear either. So I do sort of see, and I'd be curious to hear questions from you folks, that we're in a position like much of Europe. People look at their leaders and they're just, they don't know where to go, they don't know what to do. What they think and feel and what they see isn't being represented to them on the menu board, and they're getting increasingly frustrated. And I almost think that's a good idea. As a political science person, I say it's dangerous because that's when you get instability, you get unrest, and bad charismatic leaders emerge. But at the same time, if people are that angry and that frustrated, eventually they'll start communicating that to the politicians. And I think we're just sitting on that edge right now where we're going to see this happening. So, one other positive thought here, and this is kind of funny. There's a country in the Middle East called Qatar, and it's about that big. It's literally a little thing stuck out of Saudi Arabia, and you have to look on the map to find it. They have 250,000 citizens. That's it. The whole country is like 250,000 people. It's not the size of Edmonton or Calgary. It's smaller than that. They do have 3 million expats working there who do all the actual work. But anyway, it's this super rich little country, and they want to have a platform in the world. They want to be seen as a world leader. So what they started doing back in the late 1990s and the early 2000s was supporting extremist Islam as a way of projecting their own voice around the world. And in about 2008, 2009, they made a conscious political decision to spend a good chunk of the state's money on exporting the Muslim Brotherhood ideology literally around the world. So France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, Norway, Finland, Canada, America, and now moving into the Caribbean area. And they're spending literally billions of dollars of state money, and they can afford it because they are richer than the Saudis. They look at the Saudis and kind of, they look at the Saudis as being poor. That's how rich this country is, which is amazing when you think about it. But anyway, they've been shipping money overseas for years now to cause the Muslim Brotherhood's ideology to be spread around the world. Now, apparently there's at least one person in Qatar who's not happy. And what they did was they got a USB stick. They were in Qatar Charities computers and went download, 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 and downloaded thousands of documents. And this shows who got the money, where the money went. It shows what they're supporting. It shows who applies for it. It shows which politicians they bought off in France, which ones remain silent. And it shows the whole 9 yards. It's all laid out. And that book was just published in France a couple of months ago. And now a documentary is coming out in France, which will cover not France, but most of Europe. And what it's going to show is umpteen hundreds of millions of euros have been put into Europe to cause extremist Islam to grow. K-12 schools, students' associations, mosques, cultural centers, the whole 9 yards. Now, to make a very long story short, and I don't know part of it, these documents wound up in the hand of an agency in the Middle East, and I got called by somebody from that agency and said, would you like the Canadian version of those papers? And I was like, hell yes. So because of my past affiliation, my past work, somebody over there knew my name, and they were looking for somebody in Canada that cared about the Muslim Brotherhood at all, and my name came up, so I said, yeah, send them to me. So I have to get this Swiss email account that's got encryption and all this foolishness and whatever. And long story short, they shipped me all these papers. So why should we know or care about Qatar charity, and why is it going to be a hoot when we release these things later this year? And here's the answer. The first thing is the papers show that millions of dollars have come to Canada from Qatar Charity to 8 different organizations in Canada. Mosque, K-12 school, student association, this kind of thing. It will show that 9 different Canadian politicians wrote letters of support for this stuff. And you will know some of the names. Port. Whatever. There's also the name of a Liberal cabinet minister in there. And it will show that these people literally supported the importing of millions of dollars of money into Canada to organizations whose primary goal is to spread extremist Islam, political Islam, the Islamists. These guys over here, this is them. These are the guys they're supporting. There is a letter from the most senior member of the entire Muslim Brotherhood specifically identifying one Canadian organization saying, yeah, we got to fund those guys. They're the brothers. These are the guys we need. So this is going to be a lot of fun when we put this out, hopefully the end of June, September. We're not sure. There's an embargo on the information. But when it comes out, it will actually show that millions of dollars of foreign government money is coming to Canada to spread extremist Islam through Canada. Canadian politicians have been supporting this. So one just quick little example before I move on is there's an outfit in Toronto that got literally millions of dollars from this. The guy who started this mosque and school is a negotiator between ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So he's not well known in Canada, but he's well known in the Middle East, and he's well known for his role in trying to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda to get on the same page so they weren't arguing with each other. He also wrote a book, or a manifesto, I guess is probably the right term. He wrote a manifesto here in Canada that said his role in Canada is to destroy the institutions of Canada and replace them with proper Islamic institutions. So it's like, wow, that's pretty clear. And then the fun part of all this, his son's in jail for, guess what? Terrorism. His son was convicted of terrorism here in Canada. During the trial, and it's in court record, you can read it, it's not something I'm making up, the son, who's in jail, goes to the father, who's getting the money from Qatar, and says, Father, is this explosion we want to create in Toronto, is this Islamically correct? And he says, yes, it is. And he goes, but Father, there might be innocent civilians killed when the bomb goes off. And he goes, it was their destiny to be there. So here's a guy who's getting millions of dollars of foreign money to spread an extremist message throughout Canada, advocating he wants to destroy Canadian institutions, and killing civilians, innocent civilians, is fine because, you know, hey, it's their destiny. So this is the kind of stuff that's going to come out. And all this stuff you hear about radicalization, oh, it's the internet, it's the fault of the internet. You know, some kid saw a video on the internet, he became Salman Ashrafi from Calgary, and he went to Iraq and blew some guys up. Oh, it's the fault of the internet, it's the fault of videos. It's like, it's a bit more complex. In fact, this is brick and mortar stuff. These are physical institutions. This is what kids are being taught in school, that they're being put on this path to sort of extremism, put on a sort of a conveyor belt where they're being brought along to either have extremist views or to in fact violently act out those extremist views. So it's not a matter of like, oh, if we could close the internet, terrorism would go away. And it's like, well, no, it's not that. So one other fun little thing that's going on, and this is part of the reason why we're here in Alberta, is last year, myself, Tahir Gora, Saeed Schweib, and a couple of other my Muslim friends got together and we wrote a report which I sent to the RCMP, and I'm a criminal court expert on terrorism, and I got put into that position by the RCMP when I was a contractor of theirs. So in this report, we point out that millions of dollars of taxpayers' money is going from Canadian taxpayers to Islamic Relief Canada. And this is happening because members of parliament are sending it to them. So this is Justin Trudeau, Omar El Gabra, Ikra Khalid, Ahmed Hussein, Marie-Claude Bilbao, Freeland, and one other. Anyway, they're sending literally millions of dollars to Islamic Relief Canada. Islamic Relief Canada, according to their own financial records, which they have to produce because they're a federally registered charity, according to their government-filed documents, they're sending millions of dollars per year to Islamic Relief Worldwide in the United Kingdom. So, great. Your taxpayers' dollars are going from the Government of Canada to Islamic Relief Worldwide, a federally registered charity, and it's going to Islamic Relief Worldwide in the United Kingdom. It's okay, so there's that. Now, the government of the United Arab Emirates says that Islamic Relief Worldwide is there to fund terrorism. That's why the outfit exists. The government of Israel says, yep, those are the guys that are funding Hamas. The government of Bangladesh, for instance, saw them going into Burma and said, no, Islamic Relief Worldwide cannot operate in Bangladesh. And that's Bangladesh, for God's sakes. They're one of the most hardcore Muslim countries out there. And they don't want Islamic Relief Worldwide. HSBC Bank closed their accounts and said, we can't be seen to be funding terrorism. UBS Bank closed their accounts and said, we can't be seen to be funding terrorism. The Financial Times of Canada pulled Islamic Relief Canada off the list, saying we've got concerns about terrorism funding. And the Charity Overwatch Board in the United Kingdom said that there are 4,000 Muslim charities in the United Kingdom, and they're banning one, Islamic Relief Worldwide. So they actually said, you know, this is not Islamophobia, this is not an anti-Muslim thing. The other 3,999 can continue to operate, but we're going to ban that one. So what you actually have is a bunch of Canadian taxpayers' money being directed by members of parliament to an organization, and it's going down a path. And they know at the end of the day that some of that money is going to wind up in the hands of Hamas, which in Canada is a listed terrorist group. So if you tomorrow as a private Canadian citizen sent $100 to Hamas, you are literally funding terrorism, which in Canada is a criminal offense. But what if you're the government of Canada and you give them millions? Is that a criminal offense? And the answer is, if you read the Criminal Code of Canada, 8301, 8304, or whatever, it is. Like, you're not supposed to give them guys money. So if you know the money is going down a path which will wind up in the hands of terrorism, that itself constitutes a criminal offense. So I stuck this all together using government documents, government financial documents, government press releases, and saying this is the money flow, and then said, these are the people that say this is funding terrorism. You need to look at this to decide whether this is terrorism funding or not. I got a very polite email from the RCMP about 3 hours later that said, thanks for the email. But much to my surprise, 3 weeks later, I got a thing from the Office of the Commissioner saying, we got your report, we've read it, and we've sent it down the line for further investigation, and it actually has a file number. So having worked for the RCMP, I know that once it's got a file number, it's an actual investigation. So the RCMP has a criminal investigation open into the Government of Canada to see if they're funding terrorism or not. I'm guessing they're not putting a lot of work into it because they know where it's going, and the service has been so politicized in Ottawa, it's almost impossible for them to do anything. But nonetheless, that's the actual record. So guess what? Once again, I'm being sued by This time, Islamic Relief Canada, because, oh my God, I've associated their name to terrorism. And our sort of response is, A, it's true, you're actually doing it. B, it's not me saying this. This is all the other governments of the world saying this. And C, it's got an RCMP criminal investigation. So this is a part of what we actually call lawfare. So Islamist groups in Canada and America and the United Kingdom regularly sue people for libel. They know they can't win the case. They'll know the case will never go to court. But what it is, it's a way to silence the press and silence Canadians and silence free speech so that if you speak out, you'll get hammered. So I know people who work for a variety of major mainstream media organizations in Canada, and I've had a reporter tell me I can only do one story a month on Islam because if I do more than that, the editors get nervous because they know they're going to get sued. Other editors say we just can't touch this stuff because we can't handle the lawsuits anymore. And a number of individuals I know, including myself, are being sued by this stuff repeatedly. So this time we said, let's have some fun. We got these guys dead to rights. That this is, the money trail is there. It's very clear. We also have a ton of other information on Islamic Relief Canada. For instance, how their number 2 guy used to use Qatar charity money to fund terrorism in Tunisia, according to the Tunisian government, which is why he's here in Canada. He had to flee Tunisia to come here. Now he's working for Islamic Relief Canada because he was using Qatar charity money. And we're just like, wow. We have a young lady by the name of Fatima Benhatta from British Columbia who puts on her Facebook that we should be sending more money to Nigeria because they're good at killing Christians. And she works for, guess what, Islamic Relief Canada. That's her actual position. She also has a thing on her Facebook, which we've downloaded and saved, where she shows a picture of one of those toilets that's flat to the floor, Middle Eastern style, and there's a bunch of Arabic writing around it. And she goes, this is what the Shia do. They write the names of the wife of the Prophet Muhammad on the floor of their washroom so they can piss on him. And she goes, the Shia are worse than the Jews, worse than the Christians. So these are the kinds of people working for Islamic Relief Canada. So we said, let's have some fun. Let's turn this around. And rather than willfully going silent this time, which is what the lawyers involved, we said, let's go on a speaking tour and tell people about this. Let's put it on our podcast. Let's start a program. Let's start a GoFundMe page and get people talking about it. And we are having a hoot with this. It's driving our lawyer insane, but he actually gets it. He sees this is where it's going, so he's supporting us. And he's a downtown Toronto law firm guy. So this is Operation Kill Switch. This is what we're doing. We're saying enough is enough. Let's start the pushback. If our government won't do it, let's force the government into dealing with the issue. And I think partly because of that, that's why we're getting the Qatar papers from the Middle East, because Middle Eastern countries want this crap shut down. A lot of them do. The Emiratis want it closed down. The Bahrainis want it closed down. Even the Saudis are starting to talk about they want this stuff brought down. So it's good news. Our government's not doing much. But there's a lot of people across Canada who are pushing on this, and now we're actually starting to get support from individual members of Parliament. So we think, well, there's plenty of grounds to be pessimistic when you see what's going on a daily basis. If you look a little bit down the road, I think there's grounds for optimism as well, and that's a good thing.
Okay, just to tie up some loose ends before we go, to button up some issues. First thing, you all got one of these. Okay, if you haven't, Pam will make sure you get a few. And we have extras in the car if you need them, and we're not taking them back to Ontario. So the first thing is on this card on the back, it'll show you what can you do, 5 things you can do. One of the things we discuss in the presentation form is contacting the leaders of the parties and local MPs or people in rural ridings. People have lots of time on their hands, backbenchers, whatever. Start sending them emails. We don't want the Muslim Brotherhood in Canada. Start setting up appointments to sit down and meet with them and talk about your concerns as a constituent and spread the word to other people. The other thing is share the Quiggin report with everybody else. Watch our Twitter account. What we're going to be releasing very shortly in the next few days is a link to this, the Quiggin report app. And what we're trying to do is, this is basically a list of all the podcasts that you can start listening to from the very first one, and you can share with other people. We're trying to make it as simple as possible. We get it all the time, well, how do you listen to a podcast? I don't understand where to get it, all that sort of stuff. So you can just forward the link to people. It will appear on their home screen on their phone, and they can start listening to all the work we've been doing over the past, 18 months now?
Something like that,
2 years? Something like, it's been a while since we started on. So all of that stuff is there. And just make sure to get the word out. Don't be afraid of the smears or whatever. Today, Manny, Ottawa, the mouthpiece of the Conservative Party who was attacking me, attacking Tom, because we're now apparently all racist, because that's the new line of the Conservative Party of Canada. Everybody's a racist who asks them a question. Don't worry about that. It's irrelevant. And they say, okay, fine. Anyways, move on to the issue, because this is all data-centric. So they all claim to be data-centric. Well, if they get the book, they read it, they see what's there, you're going to open up people's eyes, and at some point, people start to change. And, within your communities, churches, schools, friends, people in your family, in your neighborhood, let them know. Some of them will think, oh, you're wacky, you're crazy, whatever, right? But that 1 out of 10 people who's open to listening to new ideas, that's the person you want to reach.